Well, I've actually called it, Does Boris Have a Cunning Plan? Now, you may remember, some of you may remember that about two and a half years ago, I gave a talk entitled, Does Mrs May Have a Cunning Plan? Well, and that was about Brexit and other possible changes in Tory party policy. Well, we all know that she didn't have a cunning plan. In fact, she didn't have a bloody plan at all, did she? So this one is, does Boris have a cunning plan? Or to be more precise, does he have cunning plans? Okay, for four issues in particular. Brexit. Number two, the parties shift to the left, because it's obvious that the Tories have shifted to the left, haven't they? Quite considerably. Their attitude to industry and business and property ownership, has that changed at all? And then finally, foreign influence. So those four things. So the first one, Brexit. Does he believe in it wholeheartedly? Well, I'm not sure. I don't know whether other people here have an opinion about it. I'm not sure. He's yet to be proven. But I do wonder how good a negotiator he is. Is he of the calibre of Trump, for example? Well, I suspect not, because he's probably never had to do the sort of negotiation that Trump's had to do. And so how tough will he be? Because clearly the UK is in a very strong position with the EU because we have such a deficit. They have more to lose than we do if they don't do a decent deal with us. I'm sure he recognises that because he has mentioned it occasionally, but will he really use it? Will he really be tough? Who knows? And are we going to have all the negotiations agonisingly in public, as we had with Mrs May? Whereas if you look at Trump, he's done deals all over the place. You hear nothing about it until the deal is done and it's announced. That's how negotiations should be done. But so far, we've had a continuation of this agonising publicity of the negotiations. And then you've got he's trying to do a deal with the USA. Now, that would be quite a good thing to do now. It would improve his negotiating position with the EU if he can say, well, I've got a good deal with the US, don't really need you. But the trouble is, Trump would realise that weakens his negotiating position, because if he realises that Boris needs a deal with the US for his negotiation with the EU, he's going to screw him. So I think any deal with the US should be delayed. We can talk about it and say to the EU, oh, we're doing very well with our negotiation with the EU, come on, but without actually concluding a deal. And then, of course, you've got the deals with the other countries. There's a lot of talk about, we want free trade with China and Japan and what have you. Well, no, we don't. We want fair trade, like Trump. We want fair trade. And I think we can do free trade, and I'd like to see it again with Australia and New Zealand, Canada and places like that, and with America for that matter, subject to certain things. But when it comes to places like China or Japan or third world countries, no, it needs to be fair trade, and I'm not hearing that. So that's something that worries me. So that's Brexit. Now, the second thing is the party's shift to the left, which has gone on for quite a few decades, hasn't it? What is his view? Does he agree with it? Or is it something that he feels needs to be changed, to be pulled back again? And does he have a cunning plan to do that? Well, let's see the things that I'm particularly concerned about. It's the relentless attack on free speech by, in particular, the hate laws, which are a way of silencing anyone that the and I'll go on to that in a minute, which is a way of silencing anyone that the state doesn't want to get any publicity for. And then the race laws, which do the same, but also they create the workplace fear for all the people who are involved in Rotherham, for example. But Rotherham is just one example of the grooming gangs, but there's lots of other aspects of public administration where there must be a lot of other people that are fearful of being called racist. So the race law, I'd abolish the bloody lot, but that's not going to happen, I suppose. And then the government has been, our supposedly Tory government for the last 10 years, has been lobbying the social media tech companies to ban all sorts of people that they don't like Tommy Robinson and others, and very successfully. That's a Tory government that's been doing that. And at the moment we have a bill going through Parliament called the Online Harms Bill. Now supposedly that's to protect young people from online stuff that you can get online, but in actual fact in there it's much broader than that. It's a way of actually silencing again people who have different opinions. It's another quite serious attack on free speech, but of course you never hear that aspect of it mentioned in the newspapers. And then we've got toleration of no platforming in universities. Have you heard any Tory MPs complain against that and say we must stop it? Oh, well, that's something, isn't it? That's 1 out of what, 300? Something like that. You know, no platforming. They don't. The student unions, they don't allow anyone to speak. Like what was the with a different view. I mean, even funny enough, it's because it's coming back to bite. It's coming back to bite the left-wingers like Germaine Greer, for example. She's been banned because she criticised the transgender thing. So that's been tolerated. I would have said, I'm sure these universities get a lot of grants from the government. And they should tell you, you stop no platforming, you stop it, you get rid of the people that are doing it or demonstrating, or you don't get your grant anymore. Simple. Far left-wing teachers in schools, that's very prevalent. I don't quite know how you deal with that quickly, but certainly it needs addressing. And then, of course, the street thugs, Antifa, hope not hate. I mean, they're equivalent of brown shirts, aren't they? Yeah. And black shirts in Italy, no different. Do you hear any of our MPs saying this is wrong? These people shouldn't be able to do that. And of course, in the process, they're undermining legitimate political debate. Don't we know about that? And then finally, on this little lot, you've got the Electoral Commission that's trying to stifle democracy. Britain First, for example, they've been trying to get established as a political party, because you have to be registered as a political party if you want to stand in elections, for 2 years now. And the Electoral Commission keeps coming with excuses why they can't be registered. And then, so that's that. Then you've got state persecution of Britons. I find this the most worrying thing, that this is happening at all. You know, you've got the police, the judiciary, the prison service, probation service, even social working services, clearly colluding to victimise people. Well, Tommy Robinson is obviously the most prominent person, and he was even the Attorney General Geoffrey Cox, who actually made him go back to court for a different case, because he'd won his appeal, didn't he? So, well, let's have another go at him. And that's a bloody Tory MP. You've got Paul Golding of the Britain First. He's been got at several times. Yada Franson. Melanie Shaw, you all know Melanie Shaw, the lady that's clearly got information about skullduggeries that went on in the care home when she lived there, probably by prominent people. And then you've got now James Goddard as another one. You know, on trumped-up charges that most people, certainly if they had a black face, they certainly wouldn't be have this trouble. Well, and that, I mean, yes, I mean, these are just some. And of course, you've got now smaller fry, someone called Paul Rudge from Britain First. He's been interviewed by the police because he was wearing a shirt or thing with a little logo on, British, what is it? Britain First Defence. You know, they've got a little defence team, and they're getting him on that as being a political uniform, which apparently is going. I mean, it's wicked. It's absolutely wicked. What's Boris's opinion about that? Does he have an opinion? Does he think that's right? Okay, well. We'll see. Then you've got law and order. Well, we all know how wishy-washy it is. I don't really need to describe that. But it's politicised, it's politically correct. And of course, whites are an easy target. You see them on YouTube all the time, people getting arrested for minor infringements. And you don't just get one policeman turns up, you don't get two policemen turn up, you get a bloody van load of policemen turn up for something. They know there's not going to be a problem. Meanwhile, people are getting knifed or raped and nothing happens. So what is Boris concerned about that? And then, of course, also, I think the judiciary, well, I've lost complete faith in the judiciary. The judiciary should be impartial, and they should hopefully be consistent. Well, they're neither. And so that's another thing. And I think that failed public servants, like all these people involved in Rotherham, and we've heard in Rochdale, haven't we, senior police officers who did nothing, social workers who did nothing, they should be sacked, because if they're not sacked, the lesson will not be learnt by the people that follow them. They'll know that they can just, they'll go on gardening leave, at our expense. The next thing is, of course, Islamic extremism. They need to address, and clearly no one in the establishment is addressing the root causes of it. It's the Quran and the evil things that it says, and in particular the indoctrination that starts from, I think, 3-year-olds. Wasn't it the Jesuits said that give me a child from the age of 3 to 7 and I'll give you the man? Well, that's where they need, if they really want to stop this horrendous things that are going on, the attacks, that's what they need to address. That's the root cause of the problem. But they're not. They wouldn't dare to. They'd be frightened of being called racist, wouldn't they? Or worse. Then you've got the radicalisation in prison. Now, Tommy Robinson has banged on about this time and time again. And just as Gerard Batten actually appointed him as an advisor to him on prison policy, I think Boris Johnson should appoint Tommy Robinson to advise him on how to deal with what's going on in the prisons, because you couldn't have anyone better than that. But will he? Somehow doubt it. I think we need to monitor mosques, ban halal and burqas, and also prosecute illegal activities robustly, such as FGM and the suppression of women. I think how many cases of FGM have been, found guilty? You can count them on fingers of a hand over the last 10 years, and yet it's going on all the time. And then you've got the media. Now this is interesting, isn't it? The BBC, for example, because we've got what they're proposing to do is to decriminalise not paying for licence. Is it because if they do that, then clearly an awful lot of people are not going to pay for their licence. And so that doesn't really solve the problem, does it? Either are they doing this because they don't like the BBC anymore? Rightly, they shouldn't. If they are, in that case, either abolish the BBC, which I don't agree with, because I actually do. I am actually supportive of public broadcasting, and I used to like the BBC, but not the way it's turned into now. So I would rather see that. I think it should come out of taxation for a start. If the BBC is not abiding by its charter of impartiality, which it is not, then deal with that problem. But what they're doing is just, I don't know what it is. It's most peculiar. So what's Mr. Johnson's ideas about that? But then you've also got problems with the rest of the media, the bias and lying that goes on in the press. Well, I wouldn't wish the press to be controlled by government, as is starting to happen in Canada, for example. All the mainstream press, because they're doing so badly, because no one trusts anymore, they're now subsidised by the government. Well, that's a bit risky, isn't it? But you've got to look at the ownership. Now, one of the things I liked about the BNP policies was they had a policy, it might not have been very practical, but it was a good idea anyway, of actually not allowing any one person or company to own more than one national newspaper. Well, times have moved on since then. And also, if lies are perpetrated in the press, then you have a right of equal size, and it's proven you have a right of apology of equal prominence to the article. So that article that when Tommy Robinson was in jail, that he was attacked by a 70-year-old gentleman, well, and it was splashed all over the front page, then the retraction would be splashed over the page. I think that certainly would be a good idea. What does Mr. Johnson think about that? Probably nothing. Now you come on to this climate change. I mean, we talked briefly a bit. This is madness. I could give a talk about climate change and how ridiculous it is, and I'm not proposing to do so. But it does appear that Johnson has jumped onto this bandwagon like a red-blooded green with such enthusiasm. And I mean, it's only the West that's doing this. The East thinks it's a load of nonsense. They say the right words, but they're just ignoring it, quite rightly. It'll do serious damage to our economy, to our way of life, being able to afford energy and that sort of thing. And of course, scientist deniers, and there are plenty of them around, who think this is nonsense, but they don't get a voice by the media, they don't get the grants to do research, and so they're not heard. But despite the problems with YouTube, at least you can still hear the voice if you look at it. So, and of course the latest thing he's come out with, this week it was the car policy. We're going to ban all, there are going to be no more diesel or petrol or hybrid cars in 15 years' time, is it? Right. But, where is the evidence yet? Where is the technological evidence that there's an alternative that's feasible and affordable available? Because fine, electric cars are nice and quiet, but they'll be very cost to run, because at the moment the electricity is, for them, I believe, in these charging points, is subsidised. But electricity is only 30% efficient, converting the fuel that makes it. Because after all, there's still going to be fuel that makes this bloody electricity. It's only 30% efficient, whereas a petrol car is, 60%, something like that. So they're obviously going to be more expensive. And can the manufacturers do it, or is it yet another fancy? In fact, I mean, I was appalled when I heard Johnson announcing this. I thought, where the hell is this guy going? And of course, the latest thing is we're going to have electric buses, aren't we? Well, one of the things that caused the riots in Chile was the fact that public transport cost was going up so much, because, of course, they were greening all their transport. They were introducing electric buses, which cost more to start with and cost a lot more to run. So hasn't he learnt from that? Has he got a cunning plan about that? I'm not sure he has. So why has the party shifted to the left? Well, I have actually mentioned this before. I think the main reason is the fact that candidates are selected centrally. And then the constituencies are given 6 to choose from. But because they're selected centrally, and when you certainly had someone like Cameron, who was a arch wishy-washy, then inevitably they're only going to be wishy-washy people that will be selected, rather than leaving it to the constituencies, are more likely to choose people that have got practical experience, real jobs. Now, actually, I started to do a bit of research on the 107 new Tory MPs to see what their backgrounds were, to see whether they were also PPEs if they went to university, politics, philosophy and economics, and then going straight into doing a research job for an MP. Well, actually, I've only had a chance to do, 20 of them. And it's quite encouraging them that most of them seem to have real jobs, and quite good ones too. There's only 2 lawyers there. Well, that's a good thing. No, 3. That's 3. But I've marked in bold red those that have gone to university to learn politics and economics and that sort of thing. Well, there's 3 of those, I'm afraid, out of the 10. But it's a little bit promising, but I don't know how representative they really are. So that's that. So the third thing is the attitude to industry, business and property ownership. Well, the Tories have always been rather laissez-faire, haven't they? They let the market decide. We don't want to interfere and what have you. Whereas, of course, most other successful economies, Japan, China, and certainly Germany, have been much more interventionist. They don't let things just go along. So is that going to change? Does he recognise that a problem? Immigration, of course, is a classic example. He says we're going to have this point system, but then we've been hearing this for 10 years, haven't we? We're going to have the point system. And again, I've mentioned this before. If you don't deal with the reintroduce the primary purpose rule, which stopped arranged marriages with Pakistan, bringing in lots of people, ill-educated people very often, from little villages with no knowledge of the West, can't speak our language, and are just baby-making machines. And that was something the Tories did introduce. It was one of the first things that Tony Blair abolished when he came in 1997. It didn't tell us, it wasn't in the manifesto, but that's one of the first things to do. That results in 150,000 immigrants a year. We don't hear about that. So, all the promises we're getting are nonsense. British property ownership, foreign-owned property and houses. There's loads of them. I did a talk once that showed just how many properties in London were either owned or leased by foreigners, and that's still increasing. Are they going to change? Do they not recognise that that's a bit of a problem, that maybe we should own things? I suspect not. And then, of course, support for British industry. Well, he hasn't been in for very long enough to be able to see what his views are about that. But I think the fact that he's allowed Huawei to have any involvement in our 5G system shows where they're going. Okay. Now, infrastructure. One of the quite interesting announcements he made during the election was going to spend an awful lot of money on infrastructure. And I personally have felt that we have underspent in infrastructure in comparison to, certainly in comparison to our continental neighbours. But then he was going to spend money like water and all sorts of things, wasn't he? So I wondered where it was coming from. But anyway, it was a good thing, good announcement. And they're now going to decide on HS2. Now, personally, I think that's crazy. It's going to cost much more even than the latest estimate. It won't provide good connectivity to all the areas, particularly in the north, that they say, because it just doesn't do that. And I think there's a much greater need for expenditure on our existing rail network and road networks. Well, if they spend this money on HS2, that money won't be there. And then finally, we've got the foreign influence. In the last Parliament, 80% of Tory MPs were friends of Israel. Is that going to remain the same? I mean, initially, I did this exercise, or started it, because I wanted to find out if any of them were already friends. But I don't suppose the local friends have had time to do whatever they do to get people to join. I'm glad to say my MP isn't a member. Is that going to change? And then, of course, we have this Holocaust memorial, which you've mentioned, which will ruin a small park, but a very key park. And do you realise that the previous government, so does that apply to this new government, had promised them £50 million towards it? 50 million? Oh, has it gone up? 75. Oh, last I read it was 50 million. Well, who cares? Another 25 million, it's nothing, is it, for such an important thing? Is he going to change that? So, I asked the question, does Boris have cunning plans? Well, the answer is, I don't know. That's it. It was a correction of my summing up, because if you remember, there were the four things I had doubts about. Brexit, the party's shift to the left, their attitude to industry and property ownership, and foreign influence. I think on Brexit, I think possibly he does have a cunning plan, yet to be seen. On the other three things, I think there's no cunning plan, there's no plan at all. That's what I want.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
If you've enjoyed watching this video, please consider subscribing by clicking the button below, and don't forget to click the bell icon if you wish to be notified of future uploads. Thank you for watching.